Perfect. So, hello everyone. Welcome to day 2 of ReCap online experience. A big pleasure today to have Will Carlin joining us online from New York. Just a few highlights and mentions before I officially introduce Will and give the virtual space to you in this setup. So, as you know, we are doing this year ReCap as an online experience. So we are focused on bringing value and bringing focused conversations and insights from different fields to founders using different kind of digital formats. So everything from focused conversation panels to today's workshop, which is going to be the first workshop in the ReCap this year. As we mentioned yesterday, it's quite important to keep the conversation going. It's quite important to keep in mind that the world is not coming back to the regular pace and dynamics of work. And that was one of the reasons why we were experimenting with the format and trying to kind of digitalize the whole experience, but also add value, something that we couldn't generally do if we had an offline experience. That being said, during the workshop itself, as we like to keep it very interactive and participative, we are really looking forward to actually hearing your questions out. So don't forget, in the Q&A section, just shoot a question there. If you have it, we'll be trying to give you an answer as soon as possible, either during the workshop itself or later on as a follow-up. And with important, I would say, house rules being said, and before giving stage to Will, I'm really super happy to make an introduction in a very brief couple of points about Will. So Will, first of all, thank you for joining us today and spending time and energy to prep the amazing slides and the presentation that you're bringing on the virtual table this time. Will is a great friend and supporter of Impact Up Belgrade. He was actually here 2 years ago on a ReCap conference. So we had the pleasure of collaborating then, and he's been supporting us in different ways from that point on. So Will has an amazing experience in prepping different organization, people, startups for pitching and presenting publicly, either offline and online. And you have a really, I would say, amazing streak of 100% success rate working with them and really helping them kind of fundraise really big amounts and kind of capturing the important, I would say, moments, elements of their own stories they can present towards whoever is, listening on the other end. So we're really looking forward to that. We have some questions on our own, and I know some questions have been arriving in the application forms. So Will, without further ado, again, thank you, and virtual floor is yours.
Great, thank you, Pavla. Just so everybody knows, please feel free to ask questions. Pavla and I are he's going to either interrupt once he's looking at the questions, and I will answer them either real time. I also have a few different segments where I will stop and wait to see what questions have arrived from Pavla. So please, as I'm going along, feel free to ask any questions. So let's start out. So do you remember back in the day, not too long ago, when you actually went to go hear a presentation in an office or a conference room? And I wonder what you actually did when the speaker got up to make their presentation. What I'm guessing you did is first that you turned off your phone, and then you started to actually pay attention to the presentation. And that's what you should do. You were focused, it was easy, and it was sort of what was expected. And that's because of something called social norms. Because of social norms, it was expected that we all would pay attention in the room. We wouldn't be looking at our phones. We would actually be with the presenter as they go along. But now in the age of COVID, when we're doing all these Zoom meetings, I wonder what you do now. So when a presenter starts or a presentation starts, and the first time they actually put up their slide, here's what I guess many of you do. You read the slide, even though it doesn't look that great here. You try to take it all in, and then what you do is you actually flip over to your email. And that's because you know that you can sort of figure out what's going on. And to be honest, this slide wasn't all that interesting. And so what you're doing is you're going to do something and sort of figure out when the person changes slides, and then you'll go back and look. The question is, how do you know when the person has changed slides? Well, it's because you are a fantastic, fantastic multitasker that you know when to do that. The problem is with multitasking is it means that all the attention is not there. But for you in this presentation, you know, maybe you were right to not pay such attention because the slide, which looked kind of crappy from the start, was not that great to begin with. So you were not that interested. So this is all well and good if you are watching a presentation. But what happens when you are the speaker? Now the question is, what do you do to try and get everybody to sort of stay with you, to be present? And even worse, for many of you who are entrepreneurs, most of you are entrepreneurs, what do you do in order to keep the people that you are hoping are going to give you money for your great idea? What do you do to keep them interested? Well, that's what we're going to be talking about today. But before I go into exactly how to do all that, let me tell you a little bit about me. So I was a child actor, and then later on I was a professional athlete. I played the world tour in squash. And so in my mid-20s, I got asked if I would give a presentation. And I said, sure, why not? I'll be great. Why won't I be great? And the problem was, as the day got near, I realized that I didn't actually know how to do it. And so I bought a book on how to give a great presentation. And one of the things it said was I should write out my presentation on little 3x5 cards. And so I did that in very small print in a non-permanent felt tip pen. And as the day came and I was there waiting to go on stage, I was incredibly nervous and I started sweating. My hands were sweating and I started playing with the cards. And as I got up onto the stage, I looked down and my hands were black and the cards were smudged and they were out of order. And there is no happy ending to this story. I was terrible. And I think one of the things that made me most embarrassed was that they were mortified that they had asked me to speak because I was so bad. So I decided that was never going to happen again. And so I decided to start researching, and I started watching presentations, renting videotapes at the time to watch presentations, and reading books on all sorts of things, how to tell stories, how to give presentations, how to create slides, graphic design, all of those things put together. And over a period of a few years, I started to realize that I had sort of a system. And the system really focused on three main things. And the three main things are the messenger, the message, and the medium. And for each of those three things, there's a secret, one big secret. And I'm going to go through those today because they're fairly similar both online and off, but there are some big differences for presenting online. So let me start off with the secret number one, which is about you, the messenger. So this is you or me today doing the presentation, but this would be you doing the presentation. And the secret is that the presentation is actually all about you. It's not about the slides. And this is really counterintuitive because these days, applications like Zoom are set up to make sure that you can see the slides super well. And so what happens often is people just put the slide to take over the screen, and then they wind up being a voice of God, and people don't really see the person. But the problem is it's really about you. It's about you connecting with the audience. It's not so much about the slides. The slides are there to help the audience, but not to do it. So what should you do? Well, better than doing just the slide would be sort of like me right now, is me here in front of the slide and presenting the slide, where you can also see a close-up of the slide if you want to. You can see it in that little square over on the right-hand side, so what it looks like without the sort of TV look to it. So even better than that, though, you can't really read this slide, would be to have nice, simple slides like I already showed you in terms of the idea of getting money from investors. So this is sort of what you want to do. You want to be connecting with you on a personal front. But the question is, how do you actually do that instead of just being up here? And there are 4 keys that I want to go through. The first key is that because you are online and you don't have an audience there to actually interact with, that you can see and hear and get feedback from, you have to work very hard to be enthusiastic. You have to generate some of the enthusiasm from yourself. Let me show you a picture of somebody who is presenting by sitting down and just sort of reading like the voice of God. And this is how enthusiastic they are. This is a real picture from a real presentation. And you can see that this is not going to entice investors a whole lot. So one of the things you need to do is you need to work really hard on being bigger and being more enthusiastic. And you may feel like you're going to actually look like almost like this guy, who's almost over the top enthusiasm. But if you are thinking about being over the top enthusiastic, you may actually wind up being something like that. That's the same woman who's looking now a bit more presentable and a bit more confident. She's got a smile, she's looking at the camera, all of those things. So you have to work to generate your own enthusiasm, to be up, to be sort of present and connecting with the audience, even though you can't see them, you're just connecting with the camera. That's number one. Number two, let's talk about how you dress. So a lot of people these days are coming and they're getting dressed by wearing tank tops or their pajamas, and they're not really grooming. And some of them, believe it or not, are even making presentations from their bed. So here's the thing. Do not make presentations from your bed to venture capitalists. And take a little time on grooming. So here's the rule. The rule is what you want to do is you want to be dressed at least at the level of your audience or one level better. So look at me today. You can see the top. I've got a collared shirt on. I've got a nice pullover on, and I'm, clean and washed, and I've gotten up and the whole thing. It's morning over here in the United States. And all of that means that I'm present and I look professional. And that's really important. I want to be, I can't see you all, but I want to be at least at the level most of you are at, or perhaps one level better. So let's talk about that for a second. One level better for a guy, if you are giving a presentation to somebody who is in corporate casual wear, then you want to put on a jacket or maybe a tie, something that makes you at least at their level or one level better. Now, if they're all wearing suits, you better be wearing a suit. However, one level better than a suit, you do not need to wear a tuxedo. You can just get away with a suit. You don't have to go one level better all the time. All right, so number one is to be enthusiastic. Number two is to make sure you dress well. Number three is let's talk about sitting versus standing. Now, almost all Zoom presentations that I see, the presenter is sitting. And in the outside world, I have a simple rule. For the outside world, when you're giving a presentation, if you are giving a presentation on a laptop or a tablet or using paper, so imagine that you are in a cafe or a restaurant, or you're meeting just one-on-one in a small conference room somewhere, you might not present sort of up on a big screen. And in those situations, you would stay sitting, because it would be weird for you to stand up in a restaurant to give a presentation, right? So you wouldn't do that. But the second that you use a screen, the second that you project onto a monitor, even if you're projecting to an audience of one, as soon as you put it up on a monitor where they have to look away from you and look up to the monitor, then you stand. And the reason for that is going back to where we are. The secret number one is that for the messenger, it's about you, not about the slides, that you want to be the focal point. So as soon as you have a presentation up on a monitor, the tendency is for people, if you are just sitting down next to the person, is they're just going to stare at the screen the whole time. And what you want to do is connect with your audience. So when we're talking about online presentations, I want you to stand. Even if you are being the voice of God, by getting up out of your chair, you will wind up being energetic, being more enthusiastic, and feeling like you are making a presentation. This is different than if you are participating in a meeting. But if you are presenting and actually presenting to an audience, then you should be standing. And it should look something like this, where you would be standing on screen and you'd have a screen behind you if you possibly can. Now, I know that not everybody has a screen behind them, and so I will cover a little bit later what is the secret to making a presentation when you have to be the voice of God, because there is a secret to try and get people to stop looking at their email. I'm going to get to that at the very end of the presentation. But for now, I want you to remember my third thing under this number one secret, third rule, is to make sure you stand as much as you possibly can. So the first point here is to be enthusiastic. The second point is to dress appropriately. And the third point is to stand don't sit. The final thing in terms of you being a messenger is one of the secrets here, which is eye contact. Most people who are on Zoom presentations, even if they are presenting, spend a lot of time looking either at themselves or at the screen to see the other people's eyes. The problem is you are looking at the other person's face on the screen, but the camera sees you looking down. And what I'm doing right now, for example, is I have a big sign on my camera here that says, look here, to remind me to keep looking into the camera so that I'm making eye contact with you. What you want to be doing is, as much as possible, is making this eye contact. It turns out that eye contact is the single biggest thing towards forming a trust bond with your audience. And if you're talking about venture capitalists, people who are going to give you money, the number one thing you want them to do is to believe in you, to trust you. And one of the best ways to do that is to make eye contact all the way through. So let's just quickly review. There are 4 things that I've talked about so far in terms of secret number 1, which is the messenger being you. Number 1 is to be enthusiastic. You have to artificially generate that a little bit because you are online without people giving you any feedback. The second thing is to make sure you dress appropriately. You want to dress professionally, at least at the level of your audience or one level better. The third thing is to stand. So if you can, create a setup like I have here where I'm standing in front of a screen. But even if you are presenting as the voice of God, you want to stand to get your energy up. And the fourth thing is to make sure you are establishing eye contact with the camera. Do not look at the screen. Look at the camera. Now, there are 6 additional quick tips that I want to talk about before I move on to secret number 2. So let me run through them. The first is that if you invite a venture capitalist or a potential investor to an online meeting, you better arrive 5 minutes early. You have no excuse for being late, and venture capitalists are often very busy people, and they do not want to be sitting around waiting for you. So you want to get there 5 minutes early so that you can test everything, you can make sure everything's set up, and often they'll arrive early too. And when they arrive early too, that brings me to my second tip here, which is that don't forget the small talk. Small talk is important. And these days it's kind of easy to do the small talk because the obvious question is, how is Corona affecting you? How has COVID-19 affected your life? Are you homeschooling people? Are you staying in? Do you get to get out? Do you exercise? You can do all those things. But small talk is a real phenomenon that a lot of people feel weird about doing. This isn't business-like. This isn't getting us anywhere. It feels fake. And typically without COVID, what we might be talking about is the weather or sports or movies or food. And all of those are great topics to talk about. People think, oh, it's stupid to talk about the weather. It is not. Everyone talks about the weather. I talk about the weather all the time when I'm going out to my clients. And even when I'm talking to somebody here in New York, we talk about the weather. It's fine. It affects all of us. It's small talk that helps break the ice and helps get you into the groove with the person. So arrive early and don't forget to do the small talk. Initiate it, ask them questions, ask them about their family, all those kind of things. Now, the third quick tip that I want to give here is something that I really feel weird about even having to say. But I have heard from some venture capitalist friends of mine who have actually reported not just one, but a few instances of a potential entrepreneur who's seeking money, talking to them from the street, doing their presentation while they are walking. Now, needless to say, I hope this is mind-blowing and you should not do this. You're distracted as you're walking along. The audience is distracted by looking at all the things happening in the background. So please, do not be that person who tries to conduct a presentation from the street. No, no, no. Just make the rule, no presentations on cell phones. So don't do that. I would invest in a setup with some real light. So I actually have this exact system going on right here in the background because I'm in a sort of down area in my apartment, and I'm trying to make sure that I'm lit up. You want to be properly lit, and this light system costs about $40, and it's worth it. And you should get it so that you look like you're professionally lit. There is a mistake that a lot of people make. If you look at this picture in the background, you might be able to see that there's a window there, and that's fine because it's behind the light. but what you don't want to do is you set up yourself with the window behind you, because that means it's going to be unlikely that you are going to come across and be well lit. So don't put a window behind you. You want to be in front of the window so that you can actually get the light from the window on your face, not coming from behind you. And finally, one more thing here that I don't want you to do is I don't want you to have a swivel chair. Now, I've already told you that I think you should stand when you're presenting, but nothing is worse than somebody who's sitting in a swivel chair, and what happens is they start shimmying back and forth, and they start doing it. And even if it's small, it starts to drive the audience crazy that you're moving, and it makes you look like sort of a 10-year-old who needs to go to the bathroom. So don't sit in a swivel chair while you are presenting. Obviously, I want you to stand, but if you must sit in a straight chair that is not going to rotate back and forth. Okay, so that's going to bring us to secret number 2. But before I do that, Pavlo, this is break number 1. I finished with the messenger. Do we have any questions that have come in about being a messenger so far?
Yeah, we have a question. Maya will just put out the Q&A. So we had a question in regards to using the microphone. So it goes, I see you are not using mic for audio. How much important is to have the recording sound quality, which is just a good silent room? Are headphones with mic a no-no or just fine?
It's really important that you be heard. So I have a professional mic that I have set up here. You can't see it, but it's a mic that we tested. Pavlo, Maya, and I actually tested it the other day to make sure, because I have 3 different microphone options, and I wanted to make sure it was one that would pick me up and allow me to hear me well. So I'm not using the computer mic. I have an external microphone that I bought specifically for this purpose. Using a headset and headphones is fine. I don't love the look of big chunky headphones, so I wouldn't do that to make sure I could hear, but I don't mind it, and it's become sort of standard. The thing that you want to do all the time is think about removing distraction, right? You don't want your audience to be distracted. You want them to pay attention to what you want them to pay attention to. So if you have a big bulky headset with a headset and the mic going around, the mic going around is absolutely fine. People are used to it. The big bulky headset is going to distract people for a moment. And that might not be terrible. If it's the best thing that you have, use it. You want them to be able to hear you. It's better than using your computer. But if you can get something a little more professional, it doesn't cost a lot, go ahead and do that, because a professional mic is even better. Any more, Pavlo?
And there was another one. So how about using digital backgrounds?
Digital backgrounds are fine, but you should know that you need to have either a nice big white screen or white wall, or even better is to invest in a green screen, which don't cost a lot and they're readily available these days by ordering online. The reason for that is if you have, say, bookcases or something like that in the background, the virtual background is going to come, it's going to appear frizzy. And so you don't necessarily want to do that. If you do have a background, a virtual background, you know, you want to do something simple. Again, the big thing here is I like to remove all distraction. So if you want a logo, say your corporate logo, or for an event like Impact Hub, maybe you would have the Impact Hub, logo behind you. But for me, generally speaking, I like to have a white wall or a black screen and just present against that. What a lot of people are doing is they are organizing their apartment and putting books out to sort of see how people are going to look at their books and how it's going to reflect on what their book choices are. Here's my opinion about that. As soon as they're looking at what books are in your background, they're not paying attention to you. So I would rather you have either a simple background or a standard virtual background, or a virtual background that you've created that has your logo on it. Don't go crazy. Don't have it be in the mountains or something like that. Have it be simple and clean. No distractions.
Great. Thank you, Will. I think that's it at this moment. So you may continue, and we have more on a go. Okay,
great. So let's move on to secret number 2. Remember, secret number 1 was about the messenger, and it's really that you are the key. Number 2 here is about the message. And the key secret on doing an effective message is to actually tell stories. Stories help people remember even better than just sort of talking about something and telling what's going on. Particularly good at helping illustrate the problem. And I'm going to show you that a little bit later. But for now, I want to talk about what is it that makes a good story, because telling stories is not necessarily easy. So the question is, how do you tell a good story? And there are 5 elements, which I call the 5 C's. I don't know if you can read that, but look down. And I would urge you to write these down because you may forget them if you just try to remember them, but they're super helpful in understanding. And by the way, this structure is what has made every story from the Bible, every Greek mythology or Roman mythology, every movie you've ever seen, plays, TV shows, books, all use something like this 5C structure. So the first C is that you want to establish context. You need to tell a little bit, set the stage a little bit. Who are the players? Where are they? What's going on? That's it. You don't have to do a lot here. But then what you need to do is you need to introduce conflict. There has to be a problem, something that needs to be overcome. So even if you think about like a romance has usually, there's another person, there's a third person, or there's families who are involved who don't want them, or religion, or something that's getting in the way of these two people actually getting together. But that helps make the story interesting. But the key to making a story go from good to great is that the conflict has to get worse. The conflict has to escalate. And that's step 3. It's super important. You know, you talk about a problem in the world and, you know, you talk about overcoming a single problem. That's fine and it's okay. But when the problem gets worse, all of a sudden the audience gets much more interested. Think about like Lord of the Rings. The problem got worse and worse and worse and worse and worse before finally the ring got checked into the mountains of Mordor. But, you know, there's things that have to escalate. Or Romeo and Juliet, it gets worse and worse and worse until they have to commit suicide. All of these things are going on to make the situation more interesting. So the conflict needs to escalate. Then there is a climax. The action comes to a halt, the solution is found, something happens, or in the case of a tragedy, they die, whatever it is, there's a climax. And after that, there's a brief coda or a conclusion that sort of wraps everything up. So now you're thinking to yourself, well, that's great, but this sounds like this will take a long amount of time to do all 5 stages. But you can actually tell a story fairly quickly in, say, about a minute with having all 5 of these elements. So let me do that for you. There's a scorpion who wants to cross the river, but he can't swim. So he goes to a frog who can, and he asks for a ride. The frog says, "If I give you a ride on my back, you're going to sting me." The scorpion replies, "It would not be in my interest to sting you, since as I'll be on your back, we both would drown." The frog thinks about this logic for a while and accepts the deal. He takes the scorpion on his back, he braves the waters, but halfway over, he feels a burning spear in his side and realizes the scorpion has stung him after all. And as they both sink beneath the waves, the frog cries out, "Why did you sting me, Mr. Scorpion? For now we both will drown." The scorpion replies, "I can't help it. I'm a scorpion. It's in my nature." I didn't say it was a happy story, but it's a famous story. It's a sort of a story that sort of is well known in the world for trying to point out that it's hard for people sometimes to change their nature. But let's talk about how the 5 C's fit into this. So what's the context? The context is there's a scorpion who wants to cross the river. That's it. That sets the stage. It introduces one of the players, and it introduces a desire. But conflict number 1 comes in when I tell you that the scorpion cannot swim. That's the first conflict. So he doesn't know how he's going to get across the river. The conflict escalates when he runs into the frog and he tries to negotiate with the frog. And the negotiation could go back and forth for a while. I told it fairly quickly here, but that's the conflict escalation. We're not sure if he's going to be able to convince the frog that he should give the scorpion a ride on his back. The climax, of course, comes when he's halfway over the river and the scorpion actually stings the frog anyway. And the conclusion, or the coda, is that the scorpion is a scorpion. He can't change who he is. Now let's just talk about this for a business sense for a second. One of the things I love to do in a presentation that's introducing a new business or a new concept is to go up through context, conflict, and conflict escalation, and then stop. So I want to introduce a problem that the world knows about and how it's bad and it gets worse, and then leave it and talk about some of how much of the world it's affecting. I drop the story, and eventually I bring it into the solution to this would be us, our company. And then I can wrap around near the end of the presentation and come back to the story and say, you know that problem we were talking about, or that person who had that problem, they're using our product or our service, and now they're better off. This is the way you can start to arch your presentation into having a narrative flow by opening with a problem. And I'm going to show you this in just a little bit when we get to slide the secret number 3. I'm going to show you an actual presentation where I do this, okay? So this is the very important part of storytelling, but I also want to tell you a little bit about how do you begin? How do you begin sort of getting to the goal of your presentation? And one of the things I want you to understand is that the goal of your presentation in a meeting with investors is not the presentation. It's about the conversation that follows the presentation. So what you're trying to do in your presentation is set up so that you can have an intelligent conversation with your audience. You want to give them enough background. You don't have to tell them every damn thing about your company. You want to give them enough background so they can start to ask you questions, and you can start to have an intelligent conversation about what the future is, what the various issues are, and some of the details. You want to let them probe on some of the details. So with that in mind, for the offline world, I often tell people that you want to keep your presentation to 10 minutes or less. For the online world, your presentation and your meeting with your venture capitalist should be about 5 minutes. You could go up to 6 or 7, but you should be nowhere near 10 minutes. It needs to be short and sweet. You want to get to conversation as fast as possible. You don't want to bore them. You don't want them looking at a bunch of emails. And we still haven't solved the email issue yet, but I will solve that for you in a few minutes. But 5 minutes, that's what I want you to be thinking about, a 5-minute presentation. So now the question is, how do you actually do that? So let's talk about some steps to actually do that. Step 1, before you start to write your presentation or create your slides, is to figure out what your goal is. And in particular, I want to separate that out into 2 things, the objective and the message. The objective is what you want to have happen at the end of the presentation or at the end of this meeting that you're going to have. So as Pavla told you, I get hired by a lot of clients in order to create their presentation. And frequently I ask them, I say, what's your objective for this presentation? And they say, well, we want to raise money. And I say, okay, but what do you want to have happen at the end of this presentation? And they look at me a little funny because they think they just answered the question. And they say, well, we want them to invest. And I say, okay, but what do you want at the end of the presentation, at the end of the meeting? What do you want to have happen? And now they think I'm crazy because I'm asking them the same question and they've already told me twice. So they say, we want them to write a check. And I say, so let me understand. What you think is going to happen is at the end of this presentation, they're going to whip out their checkbook and write you a check. And they go, well, no. There's going to be another meeting where we'll get into those details. And I say, aha. So the objective, the big picture objective is certainly to get them to invest. But the objective for this presentation is to get to another meeting. That's the objective for this meeting. And in the presentation, it's to have a good conversation so that you can get them to be excited about another meeting. The reason that's important is it means that since you only have 5 minutes, you can leave a lot of stuff out. You do not need to answer every question. You do not need to show them all the pro forma financials. You do not need to show them. You need to give them a sense. Do they understand what the solution that you're offering is? Do they see its potential? Do they think it's a good business? That's about it. I'm going to tell you exactly the outline in just a few minutes. But number 1 is understand your objective, which is usually to get them excited enough to have another meeting. Now, the message is different there. The message is not, hi, it's nice to meet you. Can we schedule our second meeting? The message is, it pertains to you. And here's a way that I've found it's helpful to think about it. Imagine that your audience goes back that night and one of the people who is in your room is in bed with their partner later on, and they say something like, hey, you know something? I saw this amazing presentation today. They have a business that, and that blank, that you want them to remember, that they're going to tell their partner that night, that sentence, that's your message. What is that message for your company? How would you like a husband or a wife or a boyfriend or a girlfriend or a boyfriend or a boyfriend or a girlfriend or a girlfriend to explain it to their significant other? What would you like that sentence to be in your ideal world? And you want to start with that you get that clear in your head, that what's the one sentence that describes your company or describes your business proposition that they would be able to repeat back and that would sound cool to somebody else who hasn't heard your presentation. That's your message. So now that you started to figure that out, and that's not easy, but once you start to figure that out, we can move on to step 2. Step 2 is the first thing I want you to write is the end of your presentation. What is the last slide or 2 going to be? And partly what that is, it's the message that we were just talking about. You want to end by repeating the message or by showing it or by making it clear. So the first thing I want you to write in your presentation is the last slide. Start with the end. Once you know where you're going, the rest of the presentation becomes easier to figure out. So once you figure out your message, then it should be relatively straightforward to write that end concluding slide. Step 3 is, now that you've done that, I want you to figure out your outline a little bit. What are the things you need to cover? And let me give you a little bit of an outline that I think is pretty appropriate here. This is sort of in a 5-minute presentation. If you covered this, you'd be doing very well. It's, what's the problem? What's the big world problem or the problem that your thing is going to solve? And you just want to introduce it as a problem. You have not yet introduced your company. Then you want to talk about what would the solution be in an ideal world. We still have not introduced your company yet. We're just talking about what would a good solution be for the world. And ta-da, wouldn't you know it, here's our company. Okay, so there's a problem, there's a solution, and now we introduce our company. Then what we need to talk about is some stuff to give the audience a sense of how good is your business, what is it likely to do. So we talk about the market, the overall potential, in other words, how big could this be, and where we are now. And if you cover just that in 5 minutes, you're going to be doing well. There's other stuff you could get to for sure. You could talk about the team, the founders, market comparables, some other interesting stuff, and sometimes that's appropriate. But I want you to be thinking about an online presentation of 5 minutes, and this is a pretty good outline for you to get to. So now we've got your objective, we've got your message, we've got your end, we've got your outline. Now what I want you to do, step 4, is to write the start. What's the opening of your presentation? How are you going to get them interested? And this is where the scorpion and the frog and the 5 C's comes in. Because a great way to start is just with a person or an actual character who is experiencing the problem that your company is trying to solve. Okay, so you introduce them and you want to give them a name. You want to tell a little bit about them, and you want to talk about why they have a problem, the conflict escalates, and then you talk about, and they're not alone. In fact, worldwide, da-da-da-da-da. Or in Serbia, or in Slovenia, or in Slovakia, or in the United States, or in Europe, whatever it is, you want to expand out why this is a bigger problem. And then what would the solution be, etc. Go from there. But you want to start with the start, which is usually starting with a story about the problem to illustrate the problem. Now that we've got the beginning, and we've got the end, and we've got our outline, the step 5 is to fill in the blanks. And you got to figure out how you're going to cover all the rest. Once you've done that, your presentation is sort of ready to go. So I'm going to move on to secret number 3, but before I do that, let me check in with Pavlo again and see if there are any questions that have come up when I'm talking about the message.
Great insights, Will. So we have a couple of more questions coming in. So
great.
One of them was, so any advice for online demo day pitching? So it's a series of pitches that goes like one after the another. So how to like stand out, and what would be the tips for that?
Well, the biggest way to stand out is that if you do a bunch of the stuff I'm talking about right now, so you have big, simple slides. Well, we haven't gotten there yet, but you have something that's easy to understand. You click through quickly. All of the things that I'm about to talk about and show you are going to make you different than most of the other presentations. So I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but let me tell you one of my things. No bullet points. You'll notice so far on the slides that I've shown, or that you've seen on your little squares there, that I have no bullet points. So most presentations that are set up for investors are a series of long bullet points, and they read through one by one by one. If you tell a story and you make it interesting and exciting, and you are the one presenting, you are going to stand out from the crowd. Remember, it's about you as much as it is the slides. If you are focused on you making a good impression with everybody, you're going to be different than a huge number of the presentations. The whole reason I have a business is that despite me being out here for a number of years, and or other people who are good coaches as well, who preach fairly similar concepts, most people still don't do them, and they still don't get it. So we have a business because most presentations made to investors are bad.
Great, thank you, Will. And another one is, so what about the ask? So usually we are asking something from investor. Where would be a good point in the presentation flow to ask that, we are looking for investment, or we are, searching for a partner, or no. So where would be the good point for that one?
It's not in the presentation, okay? A lot of people sort of ask me now, so where should I say we're looking for this amount? No. You should first get into the conversation with people. You want to make sure that they understand what you're trying to do, that they understand the potential. And if you put a number out first, this is sort of a secret of negotiating, is if you put a number out first of exactly how much we're looking for, that can sometimes limit or change the perception of the venture capitalist. What you want to do is excite them first, get into the conversation, and then they will ask you, what are you looking for at the appropriate point in the conversation. So this is something that you don't actually need to worry about that much. It will come up in the conversation. Remember what I said earlier, the goal of this meeting with the potential venture capitalists or investors is to get to the conversation and to be able to have a good conversation where they understand enough of the business that they can ask you intelligent questions. And that's one that they're going to ask you. What are you looking for in this round? What is this round all about? Let me just cover one exception to this. If you're entering a competition, and a bunch of you I know enter competitions, and the competitions have some prize money that it's allotted for first, second, and third place, those amounts, you do want to address those in the presentation, because usually what judges are looking for is, if we award this team or this company the prize, what would they do with our funds? And that may sound like that's similar to an investment, but because you're going to have a conversation with the investors, that'll come out. With a competition and their judges, the questions are usually very limited, short time, and so you want to actually spell out what you would do with the proceeds.
Great, thank you, Will. So that's it so far. Please do continue. We'll have some more later. Okay,
so secret number 3. So let's just talk about where we've been so far. Secret number 1 was about you, the messenger, and it's about you, not the slides. Number 2 is about the message itself, and it was to tell stories and figure out your overall structure. Number 3 is about the medium. And when I'm talking about the medium here, I'm talking about slides in particular. So let's just talk about what is the secret. The secret, as you probably already figured out, is to make your slides ridiculously super simple. So that even though this screen is hard to see over online, I know that even though it's small on the side of your computer, you can actually read most of these slides, because I have huge fonts and they're very, very simple. So that's one of the keys. So let's just talk for a second about going backwards for a second. A lot of people ask me to come and help them work on the deck or the presentation. And one of the things I want to correct here is there are actually 4 things that you need, not 1. And so the 4 things are, they start off with, let's say you set up a meeting with a venture capitalist, okay, or an investor. And the meeting's coming up, it's in a few days. that venture capitalist or investor is almost surely going to send you an email or give you a call and say, hey, can you send me your deck before the meeting? And what you're thinking to yourself in your head is, you're going to say, sure, but what you're going to actually think in your head is, no, I'm not going to send them the deck. Because here's the reason why I don't want you ever to send a deck if you possibly can. I will tell you there's one exception for it in a second. When you do that, there are two problems. Problem number one is you don't really know whether or not they read the deck before the meeting. And so you're sort of in this weird place, or should you present it as though, they haven't read it, or should you present it, assuming they have read it, and then you're going to figure out into the presentation that they actually haven't read it. So you're sort of in this weird place. The second problem is the one that really concerns me, though, which is that if they have read it, they've been a good venture capitalist or investor, what they're going to come in with is armed with questions. And what that means is almost certainly you are going to lose control of the meeting almost from the start. You're coming in ready to give your 5-minute presentation to get things set up so that you can get onto an even ground. And instead they just say, I've read it already. Let's just dive in. I've got some questions for you. Boom, 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 boom. And you're on the defensive and reacting the whole time. So if you're not going to send the presentation, but you are going to say yes, what is it that you want to send? What I would like you to think about sending is what I think of as an article. Great if you've been lucky enough to have been featured in an article in some magazine or some newspaper, even if it's local, that's great, send that. More often though, particularly when we're talking about startups, is no such article has been written. So instead, I often, for my clients, do that myself. I'm going to show you a sample of that in a second. The second thing is now we are actually in the presentation, okay? And we're going to give an in-person presentation or an online presentation. Now, if I were to present to you or send you the slides for this presentation, for example, today, it wouldn't really make a lot of sense. You might sort of be able to remember some of the points, but you certainly wouldn't know what I was talking about before you had me as a narrator. Here's something that I want you to think about. For an in-person or an online presentation, if you can send it to your potential investor and they can get the story, your slides suck. Let me say that again. Your slides suck. Not they're good, they suck. What you want is you want to be the narrator that brings the slides to life. Right now, for example, if I just sent you this slide, you wouldn't necessarily know what these things mean. But now you know it means send an article, make an in-person presentation. But after that in-person or online presentation, the meeting's gone well, and they're excited about what you're doing, and they write you an email or they say to you at the end of the meeting, hey, you know something? I really loved what we talked about today, and I love what you're trying to do. I'd like to share it with some other people. Could you please send me the deck? And they may even be talking about the deck you just presented. And again, you're thinking to yourself, well, if I'm following Will's rules, then the slides aren't going to make sense without me. So it would be stupid to send that. So what you need to have is item number 3, which is a PDF of what I call a send deck. And that deck is different. And let me tell you, well, I'll come back to it in a second. But that deck has to have all the words and has to explain everything and needs to be easily digestible very fast. And I'm going to show you a sample of that in just a few minutes. And the fourth thing is something I don't really work on a lot, but let's say it's to the fact that you are getting to the deal and it's sending the numbers, the agreement, the legal stuff, or your pro formas, all the stuff that actually closes the deal. And that's sort of paperwork, but you want to have that. So there are 4 things you need. You need something that you are going to send in advance of the meeting. I like to think of as an article. I'm going to show you that in a second. Then an in-person presentation. I'm going to show you the first few slides from a sample in-person presentation in a second. The third is the send deck, which looks very different from the in-person, and that has to be able to get across when somebody opens it up on their computer very fast. And the fourth is the materials to close the deal. So let me show you some samples of this. So I was working with one of the company of a young Yale grad who has started a credit card evaluation company in Asia. And so he did not yet have an article that had been written about him. So what I did was I created an article that looked like it comes from the New York Times. You guys may or may not know sort of what the New York Times looks like. I know there's an international edition, which you may get over there, but it usually has a big picture, and I use the same fonts. And if I zoom in on it, you can sort of see what it looks like, and it looks nice and professional. Now, I don't have a byline. It doesn't say it's coming from the New York Times, but why is this more effective? Because it's a narrative, and it covers the company in about one paragraph of what the company is trying to do, but it's sort of general interest. Here's what the venture capitalist or the investor wants. What they want is not to look stupid in the meeting. They want to get enough information so that they have some context in which to hear your presentation. Most of them don't want the actual presentation either. They just want enough information. So sending an article, this one for a financial things looks like the New York Times. I've done one for a fashion industry, which looked like it came from Elle magazine. I've done another one for a tech company that looked like it came from Wired magazine. I sort of use those magazine formats, write the article. It's not a press release, but write the article sort of as a feature article and send that. One page, only one page. Short, sweet, to the point. Usually there's one paragraph that describes the company. That's item number one. Let me just say one caveat. 90% of the investors are happy with this because it gives them some context and it's actually easy to read. There's 10% of investors who get annoyed or will say, no, I want the deck. If you get that, send the deck. You're not trying to annoy the potential investor. But most of them are happy with this. In fact, they actually prefer it. They get something that gives them enough of an overview. If you ask them if they would prefer it, they'll say no, they want the deck. But when you send them this, it actually satisfies about 90% of them. But if you get one of the 10% who are desperate to get the presentation, you will send it. But you will probably send the send deck, not the in-person deck. All right, let's look at an in-person deck. I'm not going to tell you what this company is. This is a company that I helped get funded, and I'm going to give the first dozen or so, or the first few slides of this presentation. It'd be like, what the heck is this? Why are you showing me 5 pictures of your dog? But with the narrative, you were probably pulled into the narrative and it made it sort of interesting. That's the difference of an in-person presentation. Now let me talk about the send deck for a second. The send deck is interesting because the difference between a send deck and an in-person deck, let me just talk about what a send deck is doing. So a send deck normally has a situation where what's happened is you have sent the presentation on, and when I get the presentation, I want to send it to a friend of mine. What I do is I send it with this email. It says, hey, Mike, met with these guys today. What do you think? No context, no industry, no nothing. I'm just sending a PDF of something they don't have any concept about. So what this PDF has to do is take the audience from 0 to 100 ridiculously fast. And it turns out through a whole bunch of studies that have been done on people who open these presentations that the person, the friend who's looking at it to evaluate it, or the colleague, spends about 4 seconds per slide. 4 seconds per slide. They just click through. Boom, boom, boom. So I'm going to show you this presentation. I'm going to click through this presentation very quickly. And I'm going to spend about 4 seconds just reading it to you because I don't know if you'll be able to read it that easily. So let me quickly do that. I'm just going to read you the top of the presentation. The problem: pet owners, pets, and vets all want a better, more professional experience. Sorry, please move this window away from the shared application. The solution: a veterinary experience radically redesigned from the pet owner's perspective. The time is right. The industry is serving neither customers. So this is the send deck. So just to give context, let me read it from the top. This is slide 1. The problem: pet owners, pets, and vets all want a better, more professional experience. The solution: a veterinary experience radically redesigned from the pet owner's perspective. The time is right. The industry is serving neither customers nor employees well. Small door veterinary: a complete reimagining of the veterinary experience for owners, vets, and pets. The mission: to be the most trusted brand in veterinary care. The vision: to transform care to a physical, virtual blend with long-term trusted relationships. And then it gets into technology, the branded experience, the membership approach, the fact that it's a public benefit corporation, what's the effect, a veterinary experience where vets can do what they do best, care for pets, the value proposition, extraordinary care and convenience at an accessible price, the market fundamentals, talks about the size of the market and that pet ownership is a very high and spending is outpacing growth 3-to-1. Market comparables, this idea for human health has worked well. Where we are now in terms of milestones, what's coming up, who's the team, who are our advisors, what's the expansion strategy, and the bottom line. Now, if you click through this in 4 seconds, I'm guessing right now that you get what small door veterinary is. Let me just go back to sharing the correct thing again. There are 5 elements to this slide that I've sort of set up. 1 is the headline. 2 is what I call the subheadline. And with the headline and the subheadline in number 3, the picture, you get the story very quickly if you just read that. But there's more information that I didn't read you, which is these bullet points below. So that if the person understands what your company is doing and is interested, they can actually go and read the bullets and 5 or some illustrations that go. This is a nice format for the send deck, which is very different from the in-person presentation deck. All right, let me just talk for a second about pictures in an in-person presentation deck. One of the things you may notice is I use big screen pictures all the time. So I want to point out one thing that people often do. I don't know if in Serbia and Slovenia and Slovakia, you all know who Oprah Winfrey is, but I'm guessing you probably at least heard of her. She's very famous in the US. And let's say that I wanted to put her picture into a slide. Well, it doesn't quite fit the slide. So what I want to do is I want to make it fit the slide. And what most people do, who don't know what they're doing, is they do this, is they wind up stretching poor Oprah out. And you don't want to stretch Oprah ever. Oprah's very compelling. So instead, what I would want you to do is to actually make the image much bigger so that it's actually the width of the slide, then pull her down a little bit so that it's centered. And then what I want you to do is crop it, and all of a sudden you've got this great slide, and you compare it to the original slide, and you'll see that now she's filling up the whole screen as opposed to just part of the screen, and you haven't stretched Oprah. So I love full screen pictures better than anything that's just part of the screen. You want to use full screen pictures, but make sure you don't accidentally stretch the person incorrectly. Keep the proper size ratio. All right, let's talk about how you keep people's attention and how to make sure your slides are super simple. One of the things I like to think about is what I call the 15-second rule, which is that imagine that your slide is going to advance, whether you like it or not, every 15 seconds. There, you can only put so much material on a slide because it's going to vanish in 15 seconds. This means you're going to have one major point per slide, and that's the way I want you to think. Now, is that going to prevent somebody from looking at their email? If you actually were advancing it every 15 seconds, it would help, but that's still not the answer. So if you have to be the voice of God and you are going to have a presentation that is just using the slides and you're not present, just your voice is present, what do? The final secret is that instead of it being to prevent them from looking at email, instead of it being a 15-second rule, it's a 6-second rule. That means that your slide needs to change every 6 seconds. And if you do that, people will not feel like they can actually go look at their email. So let's just talk about what that means for you. If we're talking about a 5-minute investor presentation and every 6 seconds you're changing the slide, that means there's 10 slides per minute, 60 seconds. So in 5 minutes, you would be creating a 50-slide presentation. Now, I'm not saying that you all should or need to do this. If you are the presenter, you wouldn't need to do this as much. So I do not have, my slides have not been changing every 6 seconds, but you might be surprised that right now we're on slide, I think it's about 130. So in this hour long, we've been going almost exactly for an hour now. I've been through 130 slides, so about every 30 seconds, even with me there. It hasn't felt that rush to you because I've been telling stories, but in an online presentation where they're not going to see you, you want to have your slides advance every 6 seconds. Okay, so let me sum up. In conclusion, there are 3 things that I'm hoping you think about the online world. Number 1 is that remember it's about you, not about the slides. Despite the fact that technology is set up to make the slide center stage, particularly when you're talking about potential investors or venture capitalists, they are buying into you, not your slides. So you want to be front and center. And all those things I talked about that make it better, making eye contact is one of the most important. The second thing is when you're developing the message, think about how to tell a story and use the 5 steps that I talked about in terms of creating the presentation. Know your objective, figure out your message, write the end first, then come back and figure out your outline, write the beginning, and then fill in the blanks. Those are your 5 steps. And finally, regardless of whether you're doing online or off or an in-person presentation, you want to make your slides incredibly simple. No bullets. You could have up to 3 things on this, but really you want to be thinking about 1 word or 1 point per slide. If you do all this and you actually put together and you get it, I hope that your reaction from investors will be like these soccer players who are applauding health workers, that you'll get your virtual round of applause. And with that, I thank you very much. So, Pablo, are there any final questions that people have come up? Or now that I've finished, if you have questions or things that you hoped I would cover that I didn't, we still have time. We're scheduled to go until 12:30. I think we'll probably end early. But now my intent is just to answer a bunch of questions from you all as they come in.
First of all, thank you so much, Will. The presentation was amazing. You kept the energy and the enthusiasm and engagement high. So really, walking the talk, from from your end. So we had a bunch of questions that arrived during the last part, but also during the whole presentation. So one of them was, can presentation be a movie? And after that time, we use it for a question. So what are your tips and insights on this one?
I don't love the presentation being the entire movie, but I love movies being part of the presentation. So for example, if you have a product demo, particularly technological product demo, and frequently I often tell people, even if their product's been tested really well, not to do a live demo because often things go wrong even though the technology is working perfectly, and instead to make a movie of a demo. So for me, I love using a movie. But if you have the movie be the whole thing, the maximum length I would have it be is 2 minutes. And if you can make it 2 minutes or fewer, that works pretty well. And it gets the audience engaged. Again, keeping in mind that we're talking 5 minutes total. The problem with the movie, I like the movies for demonstrating. The problem is, remember what secret number 1 was? It's about you. So as soon as you put the movie up, we've lost you. Now we're understanding about the business and the product, but we're not connecting with you. So I only want it to be part of your presentation, not the full presentation, because we need to connect with you.
Perfect. Great. Thanks. And another question was, and we get this quite often from founders, when we have a co-founders, they tend to do a joint presentation, like 2 of them, or even sometimes 3 of them. So what are your thoughts on this one?
That's a great question. It's great because the answer is it depends. And I've been through this situation a lot. And what happens is when I'm rehearsing with the team, I usually eventually make the decision and tell them what they should do. So here's the thing that's most important. Number 1 is what you want to do is look as compelling as possible. So if one person is more fluent in whatever language it is a better presenter, is more confident, don't worry that you're not looking like you're equal partners or whatever. Use that person. You want your company and your concept and you as a team to come across as positive as possible. Now, if you're really co-founders or even co-founders, then what you want to do is immediately in the question and answers is have that person now perhaps lead or take the first few initial questions, the person who was not presenting, so that you make sure to show that you really are a team. Now, I have had situations where both people are pretty comfortable, and so we split up the presentation. And I've even had a presentation with up to 4 people where each of them had a speaking part. But generally speaking, if we're talking about a 5-minute presentation, you could split it up with 2. You'd need to figure out exactly where you're going to do that. And I wouldn't just do it at 2.5 minutes. I'm going to hand off to the other person. It would really need to be about expertise or something that made sense. And really, the way I would evaluate it is have each of them, this is what I normally do when I'm coaching a team, I have each of them do the whole presentation separately. I want to see how they present it alone. And then I want to split it up at various points and see whether that handoff is effective. So I hate to say it depends, but remember the ultimate goal here is you want your company to look as good as possible. So you want the best presenter there. By the way, if you use 2 and one is slightly better than the other, you would start and end with the best person. So those are the 2 most important parts. And you want to decide whether you're going to have person who's the better presenter start or end. But those are the 2 most important parts of the presentation. So in summary, very quickly, have both of you rehearse, figure out whether one is better. If you're both pretty good, figure out if it makes sense to have a place where you split off, and then practice the handoff extensively.
Great. Thank you, Will. And before we go to other questions, now we're going to move to a meeting mode so we can also see other participants who were joining in and also see their faces. It will help with the interaction a bit. And also, while we're doing that, an invitation to all the participants, now is also a good time to ask additional questions. We have some few more that we harvested, but also do write in chat more questions that you might have for Will and the presentation. So yeah, that being said, another question, Will, was, so when founders and generally businesses, startups have a prototype of a kind, so is it maybe like a short video demo of the thing, or the physical product they have as a prototype? When would be a good time in the pitch flow to kind of introduce it and to kind of use it and leverage that to kind of keep the interaction going, but also not to overkill it in the sense that it takes too much time and then we don't have enough time if the pitch is shorter to cover all the important points?
So one of the things I love if you have something physical. So let's say when I was in Serbia 2 years ago, I met with a bunch of entrepreneurs one-on-one. I remember one of them was some people were making chocolates for wines, for example. I don't know what's happened to them, but there, the idea of at the end of the pitch of actually handing out samples would be amazing, right? Because you can talk about chocolate and how it goes with wine as much as you want, but really what you want the investor to do is to experience that. So if it's something like food or something or fabric or something that you actually have an interactive prototype of, it would be great to hand those out, making clear. But when do you want to do it? You pretty much want to do it at the end, because here's why. The second you hand out something like that, the second you give something to taste, the second you give something for people to feel, you've now lost the presentation, right? People are looking at it and their mind is engaged in that sample. So what you want to do is you want to finish your presentation, and then at the end, you want to actually hand out whatever it is. But I love that you have something to hand out and have people actually touch and feel it. That's great. You do that between the presentation and the start of the conversation. If they're still looking at it while some people are asking you questions and the other people are looking at it, great. You're having everybody engaged. That's a beautiful way to do it.
Great. Thank you, Will. So I'll just ask you for a second to stop the screen share so we can put everybody in the mode so we can see them. And while you're doing that, we had another question for you, which was, the people notice you haven't drank any water during the presentation. And so how does it go? How does it go for longer presentation? Is it okay to make that break? And maybe also how to use that break to your own purpose, maybe, you know, stating a point or something like that. So what are the tips there?
Yeah, so I actually drink fairly regularly during the presentation. I'm glad you didn't super notice it, but I did it every time I asked Pavla for a break. So the places where I asked for the questions, as soon as I asked him and he started reading the question, I bent down and got my drink. And If I'm live with somebody, what I will do is while they're asking questions, so now in the presentation, I would sort of pick it up, and while somebody's asking the question, I will drink. As soon as I am about to start talking, however, I will put it down, because one of the things I didn't spend a lot of time on today is how important hands are. And it turns out that if you use hands effectively, the audience comprehension increases by an astounding 40%. So what I don't want you to do is ever use a bottle of water, a coffee cup, anything like that as a crutch. I don't want you to have it in your hands while you're trying to present. It's okay to take a break and even to interrupt yourself and take a sip. That's okay. People understand that you sometimes need to drink or your throat gets parched, but I want you then to put it down. Don't hold on to it and use it as a crutch. You want to be using your hands to signal things or to gesture to the screen.
Great. Thank you, Will. And I'll ask just also participants to turn on their video so we can actually see them. And while people are doing that, another question, and this is like usually my own personal struggle, because I'm a visual guy, so I like, you know, waving hands and doing different things to kind of engage people. So how to communicate that energy online? So, you know, as you said, we're somewhat limited with the, you know, physical space that we have and, you know, the camera positioning in that sense. So what are maybe your tips and tricks on how to mimic that, I would say, flow of the motion, you know, online?
Well, I think it's one of the hardest things. That's why I put it right up front, is that it's really something you have to think about, which is to maintain your energy and enthusiasm. For me, a few of you may have seen me in Serbia when I presented, and you may remember that stage there, but I walked all around that stage. And here you see me basically stay planted almost the entire time. And that's because there isn't really a lot of room for me to walk around here and still stay within range of the camera. So I want to make sure that I am keeping my mind ready to sort of keep the energy up and to keep sort of being expressive. This is practice, and I don't really have a better answer than you need to sort of write down something. I have something that says smile below my camera there, and another one posted that says look here, to make sure I'm making eye contact. I think the eye contact goes a long way, but also making sure that your energy is up. That's one of the reasons why I want you to stand, not sit. The more that you stand, the more likely it is that you are going to be more energetic.
Perfect, amazing. So let's also check other question that we had in the Q&A section. So let me just read them out. So yeah, so one of the comments, it's not that much a question, was the presentation that you had for small door seemed more than 5 minutes. So maybe just tips and tricks on putting those first slides in the beginning to kind of tend to the max need of the, you know, presentation time. So it's like a 3 or 5 minute slot or whatever. So maybe just a few tips and tricks there if you have.
So let me talk about the small door for a second. That presentation, if I showed you the whole thing, is actually 9 minutes long. It was not created for an online presentation. It was created to actually give to people in their offices. And it didn't advance every 6 seconds, but it's close. I would strip it down and make that same presentation, although I might make the story, I would strip it down slightly to get to everything a little bit faster. But if we're talking about 5 minutes, I outlined that I gave before, which is the problem, the solution, the introduction of your company, what makes you different, what's the market, what's the potential, and where are we now? You just have those 6 or 7 points. That's going to cover 5 minutes. And you can do that pretty quickly. And again, most of that can be done through visuals. I don't think there are a lot of words there. And when you're doing that story, so if you think about those 5 or 6 minutes, problem is a minute. Solution is probably 20 seconds. The introduction of you is probably a full minute to a minute and a half. And then you get to all the other stuff in the remaining 3 minutes. And you don't spend as much time as you need on each of them. So the bulk of your time is spent on the problem, solution, and introduction of your company. And then all the other stuff is stuff that if you can't finish all of it, that's great fodder for the conversation that follows.
Great. Amazing. Thank you, Will. So this is the last call for any additional questions. And while we're giving you a time to write it down, we have it on a shared screen, the amazing visual of the presentation Will just gave from the storyline guys. So thank you guys, and a wave to the storyline. So really kind of highlighting and maybe wrap up some key points of, having, clear perspective of, the messenger, the message, and the medium in that sense. And also kind of communicating that enthusiasm from the beginning to, using the medium to the max. So are we doing it offline? Are we doing it online? And just, being mindful of those simple tips and tricks, and being mindful of the goal at the end of the day. Because if we are presenting and pitching, as you said, to a panel of investors, we are really not expecting them to write us a check. We are expecting to have a meeting and kind of to incite the interest in the things that we are building and doing as founders, and then continue the conversation outside of the presentation stage, room, is it a virtual or a physical one.
I love this, by the way, Pavla. This is amazing. And I want this, so please send it to me.
You will be getting in the next 15 minutes or so. So
it's awesome.
I guess if we don't have any more questions, there was one and a heart. Thank you, storyline guys. So we had one question actually directed to us regarding the recording of this presentation that Will just provided. So we will have the very exclusive opportunity to have one of Will's recordings on the 360connect.online platform. So it's like a member-only closed platform that we just launched a couple of days ago. So you will find out more how can you join the platform in a follow-up email after the presentation, with also some key insights and inputs on that one. So do reach out for us. And also, if you are prepping for any kind of investor pitch, you're looking forward to meet investors as a founder and a startup team, feel free also to reach me out on my LinkedIn. So it's Pavle Krivokuća, and just add me. You cannot miss me. I have some colorful hair for the past few years. So I'm the only guy with a colorful hair with that name on LinkedIn. So just add me, shoot me a message, and we'll be sure to provide you some insights, start the exchange, and do different things. That being said, Will, thank you again for the wonderful presentation and really great and exciting 1.5 hours. I was watching very closely on the questions and the presentation. So for me, it was like 15 to 20 minutes, not like 1.5 hours. So really kudos for that. Thank you for spending the time and making the effort to prep the amazing slides. And yeah, hopefully we'll see you soon, either online or hopefully live here in Belgrade.
Yeah, let me just say that I loved coming to Belgrade 2 years ago. I'm sorry that the world is shut down right now, because I was looking forward to coming back and meeting some of you new and seeing some old friends. But I will be back. Bob Osborne, who I think was on this call at some point. I don't know if he still is, but he knows how to twist my arm quite effectively, and he will get me back out over there. Look forward to seeing you all. Thank you very much.
Amazing. Thank you, Will, and thank you all so much. So looking for the email and also checking out what's cooking in the agenda and the flow for tomorrow. So see you soon, guys, and have a great rest for the day.